Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to another episode of Voices for Excellence. I am your host, Dr. Michael Connor, CEO and founder of the Agile Evolutionary Group, and of course, the proud host of VFE. And today's guest is someone that I just absolutely adore and admire, specifically for her leadership trajectory in the PK-12 continuum. Oh man, an absolute honor to have her on. Christine Fowler-Mack, who is the proud former superintendent of Akron Public Schools in Akron, Ohio. Yes, where the LeBron James is from. And I was just asking Christine, I was like, Christine, have you seen LeBron a lot? And the way she said it, all nonchalant, like he lives next door. Oh, yeah, the dedication and all that. But it's so great to hear how LeBron James is dedicating his time in Akron with that and working closely, or used to work closely with Christine Fowler-Mack. And now she is the CEO and founder, Reimagine Solutions. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, you are.
Rematch Solutions. Okay, great. So without any hesitation or ado, I'm looking forward to this discussion and conversation where we are going to unpack leadership to this depth and breadth, but also talk moreover about the current work that Christine is getting involved in. And then also to what does innovation looks like in this AC stage of education. But without any further time lapse within this, I want to introduce Christine Fowler-Mack. How are you, Christine? Good to see you, sis.
It is so good to be with you always. You have that spirit about you that's just really uplifting. And so I'm glad to be here. Happy to have this conversation today.
Absolutely. And Christine, I consider you one of the legacy superintendents, specifically with your work across your tenure, your rich tenure, specifically around leading large districts, right? And what's great about this is, looking at your tenure, the impact that you have had in the education ecosystem, we don't see many, I like to say, Black or brown women leading large districts. And I want to be able to unpack that with you because there is a huge, huge, huge cadre of Black and brown women who have the capabilities, who have the skill set and knowledge to lead large school districts. There are many that are out there now, but I think there's not enough, right? And I think that with the next leaders coming up, Christine, this would be great for them to hear your strategies and your approaches on how we can continue to disrupt, right, the leadership model and have more Black and brown women leading large districts. But before we even get to that, we got a fun question that's coming up. When leaders across the country, Christine, when they engage with you, when they see you speaking, when they see you providing consultancy support around policy, when they hear you talk about leading large districts in this AC stage of education, what song defines your leadership signature in the education ecosystem?
Wow, that's actually a fabulous question. And in hearing that question, I think one of the songs that comes to mind first is just the song Wake Up Everybody. It's kind of the classic Big Pendergrass sang and really just reminds us of kind of with the refrain there, the world won't get any better if we just let it be. That it really, the world won't get any better. The change requires the efforts of you and me. And so it really invites within the ecosystem everybody into this space. So that's one that came to mind first, but not just being nailed down to one. I want to share one other. And one other is the song Optimistic by the Sounds of Black. And I think that one in particular captures the essence of how I lead, with hope, thinking about persistence and with a belief in the transformative power of education. My leadership is rooted in a real deep faith that every child has untapped potential and brilliance, and it's our responsibilities to remove the barriers so that that can be realized. And in that particular song, then the refrain of "You can win as long as you keep your head to the sky," and I can kind of hear the music there, reminds me to stay focused, to stay courageous, to stay connected to purpose, especially in times of uncertainty and, kind of rapid change.
When you highlighted the song "Wake Up Everybody," right? And would you want to get better? Would you want to get better just leaving it be? I think that that quote is resonating now because when I examine and analyze the AC stage of education after COVID, where we're at now, we sort of went back to legacy practices within education, whether it be from a business model context or even operating model. We had this great discovery of a multitude of various innovations during COVID. And I always say the residual of that was because high stakes accountability or high stakes testing was eliminated and the true core priority was how our families and students were doing. And I just feel that now there are rudiments outside of this great exploration around artificial intelligence, specifically within education in itself. We went back to some of our legacy practices, right? And just leaving it be. But, we have to remain, and I think the second song that you presented, optimistic, right? Leaving with hope and belief, where it's not transactional practices, but transformational practices to continue to ensure that we lead our students to the potential and the brilliance that they have and that they exhibit on a daily basis. You can win as long as you keep your head to the sky. And I think that we have to keep our heads to the sky, especially during these unprecedented and novel times that we're seeing in education. But I love it, right? Transformate, being optimistic, but at the same time, ensuring that the level of transformation is there. We can't go back to the old because the old wasn't truly working. Now, Christine, your work post superintendency, right, has led you to be the CEO of Reimagine Solutions. Now, I'm inferring that your work has increased exponentially because of, I would like to say, these shifts that we're seeing at the federal level when it comes to policy, right? Now, through your work with policy and the interpretation and the guidance with this transition, can you, one, A, unpack why you during this time with regards to policy interpretation, guidance, alignment, specifically when we look at the state education level, the federal level, as well, even at the local level. And then two, right, your work is so vital right now. How do we use you to ensure that we're moving through in the seamless context in these novel times of education?
These novel times of education, I love the way you phrase that because it's forward thinking, it's optimistic, and I think that's important. In essence, we're really navigating some challenging, a pivotal moment where education systems are being asked to do a lot more. So it's a time period that demands clarity, but it also demands creativity in its sense. And I'm helping leaders then in systems and or their teams navigate through a variety of challenges. So with the policy suggestions and changes, require you to think through your funding priorities, require you to think through key initiatives, the evolving and changing expectations. And so helping the teams and leaders interpret those policies in ways that still keep them connected to their mission and really do some sense making where they are bridging their understandings between what the policy is saying and where their practice is so that they can move forward. It's not just about mandates, in and of itself, but helping them see the possibilities to be better prepared, more effective in meeting the needs of educators, of children, of families, kind of in the systems. So my role in this space at this particular time is a role that helps, kind of use the policies as tools for innovation, as, tools to think about equity and to think about sustainability. How we're using these policies to not just again be reactive and or to be in a state of inaction, but to think about how do we use this time period to reimagine our systems to be more inclusive, more future ready, more responsive, first and foremost to the needs of our learners.
Christine, and this is more of a sub question, right? Based off of your answer. I always like to say that there's that alignment with, and not in any order, governance policies leading to the actions or the core processes that are embedded within the strategic operating plan, right? How do we now from and looking at this from a governance to policy governance, however we want to be able to categorize it, do we see a policy overhaul with what we're seeing now, what you're seeing within your realized and lived experiences through working with many districts, working with many board of education superintendents across the country? Do you see a policy overhaul? And what do you recommend for whether it be Board of Educations and leaders when it comes to this context of where we're at today regarding policy to be able to elicit the work, the behaviors, the practices outlined in the strategic operating plan of a district?
I think there is the opportunity, within this time period for policy governance models that do have you continuously reviewing both your priorities, the practice of the districts, and then
Mhm.
also then those policies that hopefully are enabling and not preventing,
Yeah.
real change to take place. This, innovation to take place, that really create a culture of where new ideas are being tested, this design thinking type of culture. So I do see that there are districts that are taking the opportunity to rethink, to evaluate their policies against the practices and priorities of the district and to move those forward. Much more needs to be done in that space. And I think for many systems, it's a matter of how. How do you do that? Because there is, an implication to doing that work well, because there are communications that then need to occur. There's training that needs to occur. You might then, it might cause us to look at other resources and things like that, resources and partnerships. And so I know, you started off even weaving in this notion of AI and being, kind of post the COVID era in that space where thinking about the power and potential of AI, generative AI can be very helpful, to districts and communities that are really wanting to tackle more effectively their policy state.
One thing you said that I think is resonating to me is when you brought up the design thinking theoretical framework. And the first thing, or I should say, the first principle of design thinking is empathy. And I think we need a lot of empathy in that. But Christine, I want to talk about now, right? You have led large school districts as a superintendent, most recently serving as the superintendent of schools for the Akron Public Schools. So, with the noted shifts, I want you to put your superintendent hat back on for a moment. So, with the noted shifts in our education model in the AC stage of education, Christine, what key leadership principles do you believe are essential in leading a large, diverse, urban or rural learning organization? Even suburban organization will do that.
Yeah, but even prior to Akron Public Schools, I had the pleasure of serving for 16 years in the Cleveland Metropolitan School District in Cleveland, Ohio, another very large urban district with great vision towards the future. When I think about the notion of three did you say guiding principles or principles?
Yeah, yeah. What leadership principles?
I think of three terms. I guess I would think of the leadership principle of authenticity, in this day and age, making sure that the leader and that there is a culture of aligning words to actions, modeling transparency, and that tension with vulnerability at the same time, especially, when trust has been eroded or where there's great deal of uncertainty. So that authenticity, I think this term I'd like to call, adaptive coherence.
Christine, if you can, I'm sorry to interject. Whenever I hear something new that I learn that I've really never heard of or unpack, I just get excited about it. So, adaptive coherence. I please, just for my audience and me selfishly, we got to
And in
unpack
all
that first.
fairness, I may have heard it, somewhere else. I don't want to, claim that as an original thought, but I do feel like this notion of adaptive coherence where we're really thinking about being responsive to the change while maintaining clear values driven missions. So it doesn't mean in giving permission in the adaptive sense that we're so willy-nilly, but we want to stay nimble, have the ability to do what's best. The vision should be strong enough to withstand the disruption and the change of time. But that adaptive coherence, so authenticity, adaptive coherence. The third principle I would say would be this, and that this is definitely borrowed from a place you're very familiar with at Harvard, but this notion of collective genius. And so Linda Hill there at Harvard speaks about that. But I love that concept because it really espouses the belief that the answers are in the room, that they are amongst the team. And so if we really trust our communities, trust, the core guiding ideas, the superintendent's role then is less about, being Superman with the cape, but being that, kind of bridge builder, the facilitator, the one that's, really casting ideas and, creating structures for others to share their gifts, to engage in the work and to really own the work. And I do think at this stage in the AC stage that we're at, this kind of distributed, kind of equity centered leadership principle or value becomes really, really important.
Christine, great way to contextualize it specifically again, and I apologize that I'm perseverating over your definition of adaptive coherence because it is so true and so necessary. Being responsible for the change, but also ensuring that is undergirded with being values driven. And I love how you said we have to stay nimble to the vision. And that is the first principle with, and I should say the first pillar within my conceptual model of the disruptive effect model is lean practices, right? We have to be lean, we have to be efficient, we have to have this level of agility and being able to have this level of being adaptive, specifically in order to reach the vision mandates that our community and our voices have articulated. And I love the aspect of how you brought in collective genius from Harvard. And I'm going to go back to what my professor, Kareem Lakhani, always used to say when we would always talk about crowdsourcing. The wisdom comes from the crowd. He always used to say that the wisdom comes from the crowd. And you said that where the answers are amongst the room, completely true. But Christine, now in this AC stage of education, right? I always like to say this fourth industrial revolution, strategic initiatives must be guided through data and continuous learning of the stakeholders in the learning organization. I always used to say that if we're going to put out or if we're going to implement and unpack two new strategic initiatives rooted in this element of innovation AI, I'm just being throwing out an example, we have to increase the professional learning that is differentiated by 5 times, right? Now, I would say that we have to align those two together. So, what are the leadership approaches, Christine, that districts and site-based leaders can utilize to balance innovation and change management in this complex system, but at the same time, raise all boats through andragogy, adult learning, professional learning that is meaningful for their practices.
I love the suggestion within the question because I really do think there is this balance that must occur. I think it starts with this notion of discipline, disciplined inquiry, really, and kind of the human-centered design, really thinking about the need system, the users within the system of our processes, leaders creating cultures where curiosity, where experimentation, reflection, cultures of feedback are at the core of the system, where there is the tendency to use the data and not to fear the data, to be really intentional in that sense. So we need to build our muscles, that, are hit or miss at times, especially in large, complex urban systems. I do think we become really effective at the storytelling and sense making once we have the data that we need. But in those large systems serving such usually diverse needs and having so many students who are at risk in the environment, establishing a safe to it's that it's safe to try, it's safe to experiment it within the environment where piloting, iteration are valued over perfection. That often in that when you are driven by some of the standards and the report cards and things of that nature, people are fearful to really try and to innovate and things like that. Lastly, I would say that in creating those environments while still maintaining that balance, as you say, of high expectations and accountability, thinking about change management, we also have to leaders be better at this notion of pacing. So we're pacing initiatives, knowing when to pause, when to pivot, holding innovation and empathy, kind of in this space together so that we really are pacing things in ways that continue to feel seen, heard, valued, but also are held accountable and are stretched.
I love that answer, Christine, because, and I kind of have two follow-up questions from your answer. I believe in discipline inquiry, right? I think to create that equilibrium between how we're leveraging, whether it be innovation and change management, how we're balancing traditional practices to bring in new practices, how we're looking at, what does continuous improvement and sustainability. I always look at that from these two opposite ends of the equilibrium. But one of my follow-up questions, or I should say sub-questions, is Christine, you have masterfully done this within your learning organization, specifically large and complex. Christine, you've done a phenomenal job. Okay. I'm just letting you know that, right? I followed your work. I know your work. You've done a great job. But Christine, creating a culture of curiosity, experimentation, feedback, and balancing the pace and change management. Now, coming from me, where I was a superintendent, 5,000 kids, 10 schools. Okay. Coming from where you're coming from, we're talking about 30,000 plus kids, right? We're talking about 40, 50 schools, even more that you're managing. Bureaucracy tends to supersede in those large organizations where the density of bureaucracy prevents curiosity, experimentation, feedback, pacing of change management. How in a large organization and how in a small organization when you're battling bureaucracy?
Right. And we started off talking about to design, thinking, and one of the real, I think, principles that underlies that is that it's human centered, that there really is a value that you're up close and personal with the users, the persons that are being served, things of that nature. So I think one of the things that helps with that is, just n- with the innovative culture to also really deeply value feedback. And so I remember a mentor once told me, feedback is the breakfast of champions, and to really think about how you're going to structure the work and the guiding team so that it is representative, so that you do have the diverse sets of voices and the diverse sets of metrics that you need to, really let you know that when to pause, when to pivot, how to move forward. Sometimes you have to trust the vision, the compelling nature of the vision, that it's okay to take bigger steps than not, because that vision and the ultimate outcomes that you're seeking ultimately continue to drive you. And it's just, so I think being close to the users, really keeping that human centered value within the work, allows you to make those adjustments, really thinking about how you design the work so that you can communicate well, so that you can receive feedback, so that you can, really press, forward.
Pressing forward. That's an 8 by 8 song too. So we're gonna get that. And we can say that because yes, Christine belongs to Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. I'm a part of Pi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. And when she said pressing my way, don't get me started. Right? That's another episode. But Christine, you're absolutely right. Human centered, right? And the value of feedback. Absolutely. And I think that, when you talked about it in a previous answer, you talked about authenticity, right? And one of the aspects of being authentic is to truly listen and to ensure that we're listening to our constituents, our most important customers, our parents, and our students. And that is being human centered because we're getting that feedback that's leading them to this compelling vision. But yeah, I was just thinking about as you were replying to the questions. I was like, man, the density bureaucracy that is laden in these large urban districts, you see some of the best go in there, and it's hard for them to push, specific strategic initiatives forward because of, the multi layers, I like to say, multivariant layers within a large complex organization. But shout out to all those leaders out there that are really trying to make systemic changes in these real macro level organizations. But given your extensive experience, Christine, I want you to set this question through the lens of the AC stage of education. Where do you see the role of generative AI? You talked about it previously, but where do you see the role of generative AI and these diverse emergent technologies play with the influence to advance student outcomes? One, and then the second part to this is how should leaders at all tiers, doesn't matter whether it be from the CEO, superintendent level to the district level, around department levels, or CAOs, or even our site-based leaders, including assistant principals. How should leaders at all tiers embrace AI as a leadership tool to advance strategic goals on a systems level?
I'll start where you just left off, so even within your question, you're asking how should leaders at all levels embrace generative AI? And I would say, first and foremost, let's start there. We should embrace this moment, and so there is great potential in this time period. If we lead with intention, AI has the ability to help us. personalize the learning experience for our young people. It has the ability to help us streamline operations for those of us charged with particular roles. It has the ability to help us predict, by organizing and using the data. Um, so to predict student needs before they escalate and before they get too far behind, but it's only going to be as good as our values and kind of our vision, because AI also, because it's not just magic that just happens. We have to interact with the new technologies and tools and all forms of what the capabilities are. It has the potential to also serve as our mirror, so if we use it in more traditional ways. And if we continue to hold our biases or our limitations, it will only be as good as, kind of our values and what we allow it to do. But I think of generative AI as, in many different avenues as kind of a partner, a co pilot, an additional strategist that really allows us to know more so that we can do more, so that we can have, really even greater impact. So strategic leaders, they won't fear, kind of what generative AI can do and what the tools can do. They won't see it as a replacement, because there are just so many ways in which it can be supportive, but never can replace the human, what the human touch can do, the relationships that are built. So again, I think there's great potential for even better results, for getting better results, for serving well, for um, providing additional resources to teams. I think about even a district I recently had a conversation with that is now developing a playlist of training tools for teachers. And, you think back in the olden days where we used to have those people off in a place in the district filming, and so you only could get through a short set of training tools because it just took so much manpower. But now thinking about the reduction of the administrative burden around how you do that, you could do that even more effectively. So, possibilities are endless.
Yeah, yeah, and Christine, I appreciate you highlighting that we have to embrace this moment, right? And domestically and internationally, whether I'm working with superintendents or presenting on my 22nd century education model, or even talking about the agile diagnostic and AI platform, I always say that AI in its various forms is becoming the ubiquitous utility and our broader economic demand, right? So we see variants, patterns, trends, threads of AI in some facet of our life every 3 to 5 seconds. So we have to be able to now embrace that shift in education, moreover, because we have two new generations that are entering our buildings, or actually one that is already the mainstay, Generation Alpha, and Generation Beta, who was just born on January 1st. They'll be schools within 3 to 4 years. Now, they're calling Generation Beta the quantum thinkers, right? Or part of this quantum paradigm. So when we think about alignment, right, how can we now develop quantum thinkers when we're still in this industrialized model? So we have to be able to embrace AI. And when you talk about generative AI as a partner and a co-pilot, I automatically started thinking about the AI navigator, the systems AI navigator that I developed and designed as a it is a partner and a co-pilot to executive leaders and to site-based leaders as well, to help them navigate through some of the complexities of reimagination around AI, how to truly incorporate that. That answer is spot on, Christine. But guess what? Last last question. You made it through VFE. There you go, good sis. You made it through. But I want to try to limit you on this question, but I don't know if I can. All right. So I'm just going to say it. And chances are, because you and I are very disruptive in practices, we'll get a three and. All right. So it'll be a three and. But Christine, what three words do you want our audience to leave with regarding strategy to achieve all in this AC stage of education?
Yes, strategy to achieve all. First of all, I think I would use the word bold. I would encourage our audience to continue to be bold because I assume those that have tuned in and are watching are already, a part of the choir. And so I would just encourage those folks, my brothers and sisters in the work broadly, to continue to be bold because incremental change is not going to lead us, where we need to go. And to close that opportunity gap. So I really feel like we need to do that. This moment demands courageous leadership. Belonging is the second term. So these will all be B's. Belonging because no strategy works without the people. So again, people need to feel seen, heard, valued, and a part. And so strategy begins and ends with the people of the organization. And then again, the third B word I would use is the term blueprint. Yeah, I've seen that a bit lately as people are describing their path forward, and I like it because we need coherent, actionable, future-oriented plans rooted in equity and driven by data, but we need to move from our aspiration. We need to move from what we've experienced, what we believe because of where we are, since we've come out of COVID. And so we need to, in a continuous improvement mindset, be planful, be intentional. So boldness, belonging, blueprint would be my three.
I love it, Christine, because I was a part of this feedback group, and it was just basically kind of like they were asking specific questions, and somebody had flipped this question on to me because they've been watching the podcast, and I love how you said bold, belonging, and blueprint. My three words, I said it's the name. I said it's the name of my book: intentional, bold, and unapologetic. You are it's good, sister. You are right. We have to be bold to challenge incremental change. There's this aspect of belonging, which is so true. No strategy works without the people. And then, of course, the blueprint, the path forward, the coherence to be future driven. And this, I love it, this continuous improvement mindset. I'm gonna adopt that, Christine. So, Christine, thank you so much for coming on BFE. But for my audience, if they want to reach out to you, whether for strategic support around policy, whether it be around how can I start thinking about, transitioning to a superintendent, or I'm thinking about becoming a superintendent of a large urban, rural, or suburban district, how would they be able to contact you?
Yeah, so I'm still in the process. I'm newly coming out of the superintendent, so I'm still developing a website and all of those things. So I'm just still working off of email. And so I can provide you my email address, can be reached at cdfmac@gmail.com. So I can be reached there for right now. To be continued.
There we go, and that's why I mean, your work, Christine, like I said, I've known your work for a while, just admired you. I put you on the pedestal with some of my mentors, right? That's how much your work, as I've been following it when you were in Cleveland, Akron, no matter where you're at, we need to see, I always like to say, we need to see many more Black and brown leaders who are women, specifically in the small, medium or large urban districts or even suburban or rural districts. But what you've done as a large urban superintendent, thank you for everything what you did for kids.
No, and thank you for having me. This is mutual admiration. I follow your work very closely. Your framework that you've developed, the tools that are accompanying it are exactly what the field needs. So you are very much so a visionary, and so a visionary who's timely. And so I'm excited to see as even more and more leaders become aware of your work and the tools, just how it will make a difference for children. So
That hit my heart. So you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna erase the whole podcast episode and just use the last 30 seconds for my marketing. Right, that's my marketing material. Christine, thank you so much. Those words means everything to me. And of course, I'm going to be following up and contacting you because our work, we got to be able to maximize it to reach as many kids. And my corporation is about 3 million kids that we're trying to reach. And any way that I can do that, that's what I'm going to do. So you're going to be hearing from me soon. But again, thank you for being on VFE today.
peace and blessings.
And on that note, onward and upward, everybody. Have a great evening.